First, can you just tell us more about it and what you've changed with it over the course of the years and how you are hoping to maybe get it across the finish line when we get to session here this year?
Sure. I mean, well, this is born out of the fact that our economy has changed a tremendous amount in the last several years, and the laws have not kept up. Our antitrust laws are over a century old, and they were written at a time when the robber barons were consolidating companies at the turn of the century, the last century. And so, with the advancement of the tech companies in particular, who are now dominating so much of the economy, we don't have laws that are adequate enough to keep up and give the regulators the enforcement tools they need to make sure that the public is safe. Because you have situations now, for example, where a company owns a search engine, but also controls the products that are sold once you conduct a search, right? So, of course, they're giving preference to the products that make them money, and competitors are boxed out if they don't have a financial relationship with the tech company. And so that's just one of many examples of how abuses now are really occurring to the detriment of the public and to small and medium businesses.
How does this, you mentioned abuses, the abuse of dominance standard is the key phrase you
Yeah.
could say here. How does this address that specifically?
Yeah, that's the new standard that we would impose what much of the rest of the world already has in place, which is a standard called abuse of dominance. And that means what it sounds like. If a company has a dominant position in the marketplace, and that would be defined both in the law broadly and then by regulations more specifically, that they could not engage in the kind of practices that would harm their competitors or the public. And what does that mean? That means if they know that they can squeeze out other companies. They can set prices in a way that is artificially high for the public once they're the only player in the game. Or in the initial stages of competition, they artificially depress their prices to drive their competitors out of business. Or in the case of the search engine we talked about, the competitors won't even see the light of day because the public will never see their product as an option for them. And so there's so many tentacles to the ability now of these big companies to control and dominate the marketplace, which hurts the public ultimately, because we have a system that thrives on competition and fair competition. And if businesses can't compete with each other fairly, the public is going to be the loser in the end.
What is your counter? I know the Business Council has come out against this seems like every time it comes up. What is your counter to their arguments that it goes too broad, it's too vague, and that it also penalizes businesses that are operating in a fair, competitive manner?
Well, it doesn't penalize anyone operating in a fair competitive manner. By definition, we're saying you have to be abusing your position in the market to be subject to any regulation and enforcement that would come from this. But it doesn't surprise me that the Business Council suppose they represent all the big companies who are abusing the markets right now. And so, whether it's Amazon or Google or whoever they're doing the bidding for, those are the people we're trying to get. So it's not surprising to me that their representatives would be opposing this. But look, we've passed it through the Senate a couple years going now. The National Teamsters Union has decided this is a priority for them. Excuse me. We have a great sponsor in the Assembly and the majority leader on that side. And so I think we have some real momentum going into next session.
They argue also that the enforcement is already happening. Do you think it's just not going far enough when it comes to enforcement?
No, enforcement is not happening, or else we wouldn't see these abuses. We have antitrust laws that were built for a different economy. They're over 100 years old, and court decisions over the years have whittled away at them even further. And so there's really not a lot of teeth into the ability to enforce against antitrust in this country right now, or in this state. And that's what we're trying to change. So again, the people who represent the abusers are going to oppose this and throw all sorts of nonsensical arguments up against the wall to hope to slow this down. But the fact is that the organizations that represent working people and small businesses are all in very large support of this effort. And hopefully, as we roll into next session, we'll see it get done.
When we're talking about, fiscal impacts, new policies, things like that, obviously you've aligned with Zohran Mamdani on several different bills, even in the legislature as well. Of course, he's running for mayor now, and will be up for election in November. I wanted to ask you about some of the policy that you've looked to implement with him, the free bus fare, the congestion pricing. I know that the question becomes then, how do you pay for all of that? I think people look at the gap of free bus fares and say, well, yes, that sounds great for now, but then who is paying for it in the back end? How do you respond to those?
Well, like
What is
the pilot free bus program that we established a couple of years ago was paid for by the state, and I think that's the idea. No one's saying let's make this service free and not figure out how to pay for it. I think the idea would be now, if he ascends to become mayor, between the city and the state, we would provide the funding for this. And by the way, in the context of the $250 billion plus state budget, the free buses for the entire city would cost roughly $700 or $800 million. Sounds like a big number, but we add programs at that price tag every single year to the state budget. We just did it for an affordable housing development program and for vouchers for tenants, which are important to do. But the point is, things with that kind of price tag get done in this state all the time. And so it's not like we'd be revolutionizing the budget system or breaking the budget to get something like that done. Some of the bigger initiatives like universal childcare would be much more expensive. And we'd have to talk about finding a revenue stream if we were to do that, which is also important to do. But if we're focusing in on the free buses, it's not something that's unachievable.
And when it comes to some of these policy proposals, is there also a thought potentially? I know the comptroller is projecting budget deficits growing in the next few years. Is now the time to do this, knowing that but you could be facing these shortfalls?
Well, look, it's a real good question because the federal government has taken a significant bite out of our budget with the damage they've done in the federal budget. But some would argue that this is exactly the time to do this. The world is becoming much less affordable for working people. And if there's things we can do to help them afford to stay in New York City, which is among the most expensive places on earth, we should do it. There's a lot of discussion about out-migration and driving millionaires away. I'm less concerned with driving millionaires away. We've doubled the number of millionaires in New York in the last several years. What we have lost are working people who can't afford to raise their families here. And that's because childcare is too expensive and mass transit is too expensive, and all of the various elements of affordability are a problem. Providing free mass transit helps. It doesn't hurt that effort. And so I think we need to start thinking more aggressively about doing things like that, not less aggressively.
When it comes to raising revenue, I talked to the comptroller recently about this and trying to make up for these gaps. And, of course, taxing the rich is on there. That's another one of Zohran's, I guess,
Mhm.
policy ideas. But comptroller, he kind of countered that with me. And he said, well, this class of individuals already pay a lot. And are we going to make them pay more of what this
Look, they
is?
they do pay a lot because they have a lot. Right? If you want to raise money, you raise money from the people who have money. You're not going to raise a lot of revenue from people who are poor. And so, yes, I appreciate that a lot of the budget is dependent on the wealthy. I appreciate that, we want to have wealthy people in New York, and that's a part of our ability to fund and finance some of these important programs that we need to do. But I would say we need a campaign to convince those people who aren't already convinced that they should be chipping in a little bit more in order to help the rest of us survive and afford to stay here. Because the problem with people leaving New York and the population loss is not because we're losing millionaires. It's because we're losing working people. And if we don't make things more affordable for them, we're going to continue on a downward slope.
Well, you say that, and as the author of the redistricting amendment, and I wanted to ask you out of sort of that mindset of the projection of losing congressional seats in 2030.
Mhm.
Is that in the conversations you've had about redistricting, how much does that take up? How important is that in this conversation? Because I think
Oh,
at this point, it's been acknowledged. A lot of people know 26 is a far cry in New York. It doesn't look like it can happen by then, depending on the courts and what have you.
mhm.
28 looks a little bit more applicable, but I'm curious about 2030. How much is that weighing on this conversation?
Look, it's a big deal, not just because of the consequences on our congressional numbers, but because we don't want to be losing people in general. We have over several decades now. It's just been a trend for the entire region, not just New York State, whether it's due to climate or economic conditions related to the old Rust Belt or what have you. Historians can opine on this over and over again. But the fact is, we don't want to lose population. The number one driver of the loss of population in New York is the lack of ability to afford to live here. And so, if we don't do things like provide universal childcare, make mass transit more affordable, make housing more affordable, we're going to continue in this direction, and it's not a good direction. And so, yes, it is front of mind, not just because we have to draw the maps for our congressional delegation, but because when we lose population, we lose representation, and that's a problem for New York and the entire region.
Why did you propose the amendment?
What did we propose, or why?
Why did
Why?
you? Yeah.
Well, this amendment is specific to what's going on right now, particularly as it relates to Texas and some other red states. there has been a tacit understanding that redistricting takes place once a decade. You get the census numbers at the end of the decade, and then you draw lines based on the number of representatives you have. Texas is now breaking that informal rule, so to speak, by doing it in the middle of a decade because they think there's a political advantage for them to do it. And we endeavor here in New York to do things as fairly and independently as possible. But we are not the only player in this game. There are 49 other states, and if some of them are going to go off and violate the understanding that we had about how this works, for us not to join the game and react to that would be a problem that would create an imbalance in the House of Representatives. So the proposal is that if other states decide to move forward and do multiple redistrictings within a decade, that New York should have the ability to do that also. And hopefully we'll get that move through the process. It can't be up for voter approval until November of 27, but we will be able to engage in this process for the 28 election cycle if all goes well.
Does that get rid of the IRC?
No, what I proposed would not get rid of it. It would just say in this unique circumstance, we could bypass the existing process. But then once the turn of the decade happens and we get the census numbers, the existing process would remain in place. Now, the governor and others have said maybe we want to get more aggressive than that and rethink the whole process. That's something that will be discussed as we head into next session.
Do you have any idea how many seats you could pick up?
Look, we haven't put pen to paper yet. I know that there are 7 Republicans in Congress right now in New York, and a lot of people think that that's more than they deserve, given the way the state performs and the state acts as a political body. But we'll get to that bridge when we pass the amendment and have the opportunity to rethink what we've done.
The other argument is why not just run candidates that can beat Republicans?
Yeah, it's a good argument, but you can make that argument in Texas too. The problem is once you have the lines drawn a certain way, that corrupts the process. If you don't have a fair shake, then in Texas, for example, they're minimizing Democrats' ability to have a shot with a good candidate. And so for us to play fair when others are not is what creates that imbalance.
All right, finally, I do have one more, just because it's been in the news with the executive order on bail reform. I'd imagine we'll find some lists coming out, in the next couple of days or weeks from the president or the White House, because you have authored legislation in the past, pushed for judge training when it comes to this. And you probably heard the governor, what she said the week about the judges. Where do you stand on where are the judges doing their part?
Well, look, if someone has a problem with the bail laws in New York at this point, after multiple amendments, I think it falls to the judiciary to be interpreting the laws the way they were intended. We passed an important reform in 2019, and then we have had multiple tweaks to that law based on how it was being implemented and public reaction to it. So the laws in place now, I think, are responsive to what the public wants and what the criminal justice system has been asking us to do. Now it's up to the judges to implement what we've enacted properly. So yeah, I get where the governor's coming from, and hopefully we'll get things straightened out in short order.
Senator, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.